So once again, this is Chris Thiede, managing editor of commARCH magazine. And with me today, I have Mr. Brad Earl. Brad, I guess if you could start off just by introducing yourself, telling us, obviously we know your name, but your title and your position, what you do, and all of that.
Okay, I'm a registered architect. I'm a healthcare architect and planner and the managing principal of Nelson's Philadelphia Healthcare Studio and one of the thought leaders around the country. We're here in Philadelphia, this office, and I've practiced healthcare architecture here in the city of Philadelphia since 1981.
Okay. So we're here today to talk about a project that was recently completed, I believe, called Mainline Health. Is that correct?
It was. It's their new King of Prussia Women's Specialty Health Center. It was dedicated on the untimely date of March 9th.
Very
and
good.
Closed that day.
March 9th of 2020, for those of you who might be listening or watching at some point in the future.
Right.
We'll let you figure out what that time frame means. But
it's now opening again.
So talk a little bit about the project in terms of the facility itself. I mean, what makes it unique or different about amongst healthcare facilities?
Well, part of the uniqueness is the focus on women's health services and the experiential environment focused purely on women. You know, women seeing women, women patients, women staff, women physicians. But more unique than that, I liked, and I've told a lot of my peers and some of the younger students that call on me now and then for advice in getting into this business. Excuse me. It's I call it an urban design project. As you know, it's an urban problem in a suburban area. It's a 2-acre postage stamp site in a suburban market where you would imagine you'd have seas of at-grade parking. Well, this is a 2-acre site, and we have to park 330 cars and put 100,000 square feet of building on it. That kind of an exercise would normally be in a downtown tight urban site. So the uniqueness of solving that problem was you had to stack 100,000 feet of clinical space on top of 333 cars on a little postage stamp site and make it work well and still be, an inviting place to go. So on the physical side, that's pretty unique. But on the service side, it's a rather unique step for Mainline Health. They have 4 major healthcare campuses in suburban Philadelphia along the main line, hence the name Mainline Health. And each one is kind of focused. Lankenau's cardiac, Bryn Mawr's babies, Bryn Mawr Rehab is outpatient rehab and brain concussion. And this one is the next piece in their continuum of specialties purely for women's health. And we've done 2 of these with them in a row.
Okay. So talk about, as I understand it, there are some kind of non-traditional types of amenities and so forth that are part of this facility, as well as there was some flexible design in terms of accommodating future needs that
Right.
may or may not be known at this point. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Because it was such a tough site and we still had 100,000 square feet of program, part of the building, and you've seen the images, the photography, part of the building, it anchors itself down at grade for the arrival pavilion. And that smaller piece of the larger stacked building, we wanted to, and I think we successfully did it. We created more of a feel of a boutique hotel. When you arrive at the main arrival garden, and you enter the first doors of the main lobby, you get some soaring space, but you also get some intimate little corner spaces. There's a small cafe off to the right, which has a very low ceiling and a very rounded female kind of feel to it, which makes it a little more intimate. There's a cafe in there. There's a community meeting space where they can have all kinds of dialogue about medical issues and programs for the community. It has all of the normal women's health labs and modalities on the ground and second floor, that smaller portion which anchors it to the main vertical stack. But it also has up above on the fifth floor, there are 6 floors. On the fifth floor, it has a large, on the sixth floor, it has a large community conference room, medical education component, and a demonstration kitchen where you will learn nutritional and dietary things to help either control, maintain, or handle some of the medical issues you either have or the beginnings of them so that you can control them. It's part of a departure from mainline health that they began in 2013 when we did the prior big, large building for them, which also is more unique than a normal medical office building component. That building, which is 131,000 feet, has 50,000 feet of fitness, exercise, and a 3-pool natatorium or upstream health. And this is just another example of mainline's non-traditional, far-sighted vision for taking care of health issues or taking care of yourself and lifestyle before the health issues present themselves, whether it's blood pressure or weight or cholesterol or just poor eating and nutritional habits. So the King of Prussia Women's Health Building is just the next step from that previous outpatient wellness center. Both of those are non-traditional in the generic medical office building market. I think some of the planning on this King of Prussia building on the fifth floor in particular, where a lot of the primary and specialty care clinics are, they all bought into a central registration area. We have a north and a south registration along this broader boulevard. Normally when you go into a medical office building in a clinical setting, you've got a small waiting room and then you go into your physician's practice. And that physician controls registration and discharge. But in this case, all of the doctors were owned by Mainline Health, and they all bought into the fact that you could have a broad promenade along the exterior window wall, one exterior window wall for each clinical floor, where you have a mass of gathering opportunities, tables, chairs, places to work while you're waiting. If you're a business person and you're coming in on a break from your office for your appointment, there's a space that you've seen in one of the illustrations called the Wellness Porch, which is truly a gathering space with a small retail component for types of things, pharmaceuticals, not medicines, but products that women would use and normally pick up if they went to the pharmacy or to their convenience store. And it has community tables. Now, bear in mind, all this was planned pre-COVID.
Sure.
It was planned in 2016, 17, and it was built in 18 to 19. So the grand space where everybody's congregating is going to have to be rethought a bit. However, the fact that we have these broad promenades on the upper floors and the community spaces on the lobby level allows you to spread and socially distance more and control the number of people generating traffic through these spaces. So it'll be an easily adaptable space now that we're dealing with COVID.
Okay. So, talk a little bit about, kind of take some steps back in terms of, when this project first began and when Mainline Health approached you and your firm with this project. Talk about their overall vision, and which I think you've mentioned a little bit, but talk about their overall vision and then some of the challenges that may have presented themselves in terms of achieving that vision.
Okay, they had just come off the successful completion of the Concordville Center for Health and Wellness that I mentioned with the natatoriums and all, and they had a very bright, very progressive senior vice president of development, and their CEO of the entire system, Jack Lynch, is also very, very progressive, which is why he wanted to expand into the wellness side and into the women's health specialty side to differentiate themselves. They came to me and they had a really good core team, I'll say,
Okay.
kind of organized and led by Joanne Magnatta, who is a dear friend and a very learned client of ours, and she's the senior vice president of real estate, facilities, and construction for Mainline Health. She's been there a number of years, and she and that other senior part of that team drove this idea, and I think it was built on the idea that the wellness center was so well received in the community. They said, look, let's take the next step. But if we're going to do a women's only, and it's not female patients only, but they are absolutely focusing and specializing on women's health services. As a man, you can go to the lab and you can get tested. You can have a mammogram. Men have breast cancer as well. But for the most part, most of the services are female focused. When they decided to take that leap and really focus on women's health, they wanted to push it out into the community, into a community where they really didn't have an anchor. They have one of their major hospitals is about 8 miles as the crow flies. So it's not too far away, but they were still out a little more in the suburban market and in the secondary catchment market. And they really wanted to capture a large portion of the growth in rooftops that's happening out in the King of Prussia area. King of Prussia Mall has been there forever, and it's an epicenter for retail in that entire region. So traffic is extraordinary. But right next to the mall, and as part of the property that we developed the Women's Health Center on, is a new massive live, work, play development called the Village Valley Forge, of which this 2-acre site is a perimeter portion. The downtown, if you can call it the central business district of this Valley Forge, village of Valley Forge, has several thousand brand new 6-7-story apartment buildings, high-end name brand restaurants, all kinds of live, work, play amenities. So it's a whole new community right there at the doorfront or the footsteps of this new building. So it was a pretty creative place to choose to locate it. It was a very expensive property to buy for the 2 acres, but it was strategically, it was the right place to do it. So we helped them secure that site. Secure is not the right word. We helped them test that site and say, look, that one would work, even though it was only 2 acres and the car park had to be an awfully high amount. But they were a dream to work with. And they stayed with us every step of the way until we got into construction. We had senior management meetings monthly. We would present ideas. They even came up with an idea to have a community participation project. And in the photograph of the wellness porch, you'll see on the front wall, as you would be walking into the wellness porch, almost under the sign, is about an 8-foot by 8-foot 3-dimensional sculpture on the wall, and that is all made of pieces of material from nurses' scrubs, clean ones, new ones. Oh. All different colors, all different fabrics, and they were all torn into pieces, cut into pieces, and then created onto this metal screen. And it's a 3-dimensional community project. A lot of people brought in these cloths, and then a whole bunch of the staff built it themselves. So it's pretty interesting, unique idea to bring the community in.
So, I mean, you've talked a lot about some of the distinctive features of the facility. Are there any other features that you wanted to talk about, and I guess talk about, sort of the design process behind them?
In the middle of design, I guess we were about ready to go into construction. They got a donor to fund a rooftop farm garden.
Oh.
So on the lower 2.5-story arrival pavilion portion of the building that anchors it to the site, we made provisions to now have a public access portal out onto the roof of that lower mass of the building, and it's now populated with or will be, raised planting beds with fruits and vegetables, not flowers, fruits and vegetables, which will be used for school children to come out and be schooled in how to raise, uh, vegetables, that kind of a thing. The food that is harvested from that roof will be given to the demonstration kitchen in the main building and used also in the cafe downstairs. And any overage will be given to food banks in the area. That was pretty interesting. The other piece is we have this large, massive art installation in the lobby that soars 3 stories up in the massive lobby, flanking the granite slab that comes down vertically, and that is kind of an homage to all of the floral wall coverings and bold, vastly oversized graphics in the building itself that helps with wayfinding. You'll see a large graphic behind the south registration photograph. It's behind, I think in the photograph there's a patient and a staff member sitting across from each other on a registration portal, but behind it is this massive graphic of flowers blown up to major scale. It's pretty interesting. In most medical settings today, you'll find artwork, and they also in this particular facility worked with us and an art curator that they have on board, and placed a lot of local art. But a lot of the graphics on the walls are as much wayfinding as they are to be bold and kind of lower the stress and anxiety you feel when you come into a physician's practice office. No matter how healthy you are, you just feel a little stressed when you walk into the doctor's office.
White coat hypertension.
Yeah. So it just, I mean, even me, when I go to a doctor to have my annual physical and I'm as healthy as can be, or get blood drawn just to have your blood drawn, I crank up a little bit, even though I know it's no big deal.
Right.
It's just a natural thing. So that was one of the focuses that we wanted to do from the moment you arrived at the site. And we have the serpentine walkway if you arrive by foot or by public transportation, kind of in the shape of a snake, which represents fertility and health. Once you go in that door, you should feel more like you're going into a boutique hotel. You should really slow down and relax before you ever get in to the specialty or primary care space that you're in. All of those things we used, and that promenade on the 5th and 6th floors, we use that to make it a non-traditional environment.
Okay. So you've mentioned this a few times already, but I wonder if you could kind of get into talk a little bit more detail about your relationship or your firm's relationship with Mainline Health and in the collaboration with them on this project. I mean, talk about, give some examples of that or some stories about, what your relationship with them is like.
Okay, we've had a relationship with them since 2013. I've had a relationship with them since 2001. So there was a level of trust there to begin with, but Nelson had never done a project with them. And in 2013, we were given that first building to do. I mentioned Joanne Magnata, the Senior Vice President of Real Estate and Design and Construction. Her right-hand person, and I use that term frequently, describing people that work hand in hand with senior management. Her director of design and construction, Doug Williams, and his right-hand person, Sharon, who's their senior healthcare planner, the two of them have worked with us seamlessly. Even now, when we're working remotely on a new project, we're still all doing these Zoom calls and things, and we have ended up almost finishing each other's sentences. We have gotten to a point with Doug and Sharon in particular, because they've been at it so long in their own career lives. They understand how to put together the preliminary program. For example, Joanne will say to Doug, I need a new building. And I'm being broad here. Gee, we need a new building that's going to focus on women's health. And we don't know exactly which women's health services we're going to have in there, but we know we're going to have a long list of providers that want to be a part of it. So you and Sharon, please go and start thinking about a preliminary program to get to a certain amount of square footage that we know we can put on the site, and start thinking about what each one of those might be. A primary care of 3,000 feet, or a specialty practice of 1,800 square feet, and they go down the line and they create this conceptual program, if you can call it that. And then they turn to a design practice like ours, and they go, okay, folks, we have, looks like 80 to 100,000 feet we can support on that site, and we've got 7 of the maybe 20 specialty practices that we think will attract as a conceptual program. Tell us what you think of these. Are we high or low on those assumptions? And then help us plan what else could go in that building and where and how it could go. You can't put a piece of imaging equipment on an upper floor. It has to be on a ground floor for vibration and weight. So those kinds of things, they have been from the beginning. Doug and Sharon both have been as much a part of our team as we've been their team. And you often don't find that in healthcare planning. I mean, many times healthcare institutions will have a small facility staff in-house, and they're juggling everything from you, Chris, asking them to move a door or make your waiting room in your practice 10 chairs bigger somehow, to creating a building. So they're juggling an awful lot of things, and a lot of times that facilities planning group in-house doesn't have the time to really work hand in hand with the design consultant that they hire. And so they throw it all on you to do, and then assume and hope that you're going to come back with answers that work. From the beginning, Doug and Sharon worked with us, and we weren't using Zoom. We were face-to-face. We were out at Radnor for meetings almost once a week. Radnor's their corporate headquarters. We were out in Radnor at least every other week for design meetings in the early planning and conceptual design stage. Part of that was because the site was so demanding and tight. But part of it was it worked very well, and we just kept it going that way. You don't find that every time. And if you buy in from the internal group, from the beginning, particularly if you're trying to put a medical office building together, you're going to have physician practices that come on board later on and go, what were you thinking? I don't operate this way. We have to change whatever you thought you were going to plan for my space. So the collaboration was truly collegial.
I would imagine that level of trust and collaboration is obviously it's always important, but I would think especially important in a facility like a healthcare facility that has some very particular needs in terms of the equipment and the activities that will be going on inside, right?
Yeah, I've said to students that I talk to now and then, or people that just say, "Hey, architecture is exciting. What are you doing these days?" I say, look, if you're a good architect, any architect can design a building, whether it's an industrial warehouse or a high-rise, mixed-use residential tower. Healthcare, other than BSL-4 labs, healthcare is the most taxing kind of an environment to create. A lot on the mechanical, electrical side, but certainly because you've got people's lives in your hands every day. So you have to keep the staff and the occupants, the patients in this case, healthy and safe. But there are so many restrictive design regulations, from square footage of a patient room to the HEPA filters and the MERV filters in an exhaust system in an ICU room, to the shielding in a RAD room where you've got an MRI or a CT scan, that it's very technically oriented. So it's the toughest, in my view. I think it's probably the toughest environment to design. That's why it's the most exciting. Now it's gotten more exciting since we started to have to deal with COVID, but that too will pass, and it will help better the design climate for the future and make buildings better. But it's an exciting piece of architecture, and I gravitated to that in the late 80s. I started doing high-rise office buildings and then focused on healthcare in the late 80s, early 90s.
So how will this facility, what does the future hold for this facility? I mean, long-term future, COVID aside, how's it going to serve the community for the years to come?
Well, one of the flexible planning things we did, we have the floor plates are on a grid pattern that works the most efficiently if you're changing tenants in the future. I don't expect any of these tenants to change, but there is technology that will change. Equipment gets smaller or larger. We put soft spaces next to hard spaces, meaning administrative spaces next to clinical spaces. So if the clinical census for patients grows, you can absorb the administrative side of the house a little bit easier and grow your clinical spaces. The fact that we have that boulevard, that main promenade against the clinical spaces, we have front of the house, back of the house, the old Disney on stage, off stage, the old Disney Institute mantra, which is still a great one. We have that broad promenade out front, which serves as waiting, gathering, education, and registration. That whole thing can slip and slide north and south because of the volume of space. It does. Mainline early on agreed to have a less efficient ratio of space to common space on those floor plates so they could have that adaptability and that flexibility. As I think I said previously, in most medical office buildings, even newest ones, you'll have a limited amount of space given up to waiting, and then everything else is behind closed walls in clinical spaces, exam rooms, physician practices, because still most physicians like to put their arms around their little space and control it. This building, the footprint is much more flexible and will accommodate a lot more things in the future. One of the other unique things that you'd ask about before, Chris, and it's unique to this building. It's not unique to the design business, but because we had to put a four-story parking deck as the base of the majority of the clinical space above it, we wanted, and because it's mostly women that will be patients, we expect, women in particular, some men as well, just don't feel comfortable in low head height parking garages. Whether, I don't care what kind of lighting you put, they just don't feel comfortable, and you can understand why. They're dark, and if you're coming in later in the evening, it doesn't feel safe. So we did some extraordinary lighting in the parking deck, number one. It's got two open sides, so the daylight comes in as well, and early evening light. We made the portals from each level of the parking really stand out. They're not just a door in the in the sidewall that says enter. It has a three-dimensional portal. You actually walk through an arched portal that's high colored, and it's got a massive flower graphic in the color of the level on the wall adjacent to the portal. So if you're on level 3 and it's a red portal with a big number 3, and the wall graphic on the back, the full size, full width wall graphic is a rose, when you go in, you remember you're on level 3. It makes it a lot easier, and it's extraordinary. It's like a beacon. So if you park near the end of that particular level, you can see that portal 40 feet, 50 feet away, and you feel a lot safer with all the light that's thrown from that as well.
Very nice.
Another thing to relieve stress.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last question I have is, how is this facility, and there are a lot of great healthcare facilities across the country, but how will this one kind of serve as an example of what healthcare facilities can and should be?
Hmm. Let me think about that a minute. I think I would have to say, and I'll go back to one of the points I made in the beginning. Every health system today is trying not only to get upstream on caring for your own personal health, whether it's your lifestyle or your diet or lack or exercise or whatever, hence the wellness center concept. But they all want to make the experience, whether it's a man or a woman or a child, less anxious, less stressful, less the feel of a clinical environment or a clinical visit. I think, and I've toured and seen my peers do a lot of beautiful, relatively recent buildings that do that same experiential thought process very well. This building, unlike many of the other buildings, even in mainline's other older facilities, this will truly not feel, in our opinion, like a medical clinic, medical complex. It will feel more like a place where you might go to join a class of dietary nutritional programs rather than going in and getting stuck for a blood draw or or checked out for some particular illness. It's really, and it's not a boutique hotel, although I said that is kind of the impression we hope you get when you walk into the main entrance. It's just a step beyond the typical main lobby, registration desk, smack sign on the wall, go to floor 5 for the cardiologist idea. It really does feel, it doesn't feel like a medical building, and that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to feel like something other than what you really believe you're going to see when you get into the physician's office itself. Exam rooms are all the same. They have all the newest equipment and softer colors and translucent glass walls instead of the solid walls, so you feel a little more less closed into a 8x10 box while the doc is taking your temperature. But from the materials we used, soft glazed porcelain tiles, polished granite on the major core where the elevator bank is, soft furniture all around, more comfortable things that you don't normally see in a waiting setting. The wellness porch with a big community table out front. Those kinds of things you just don't expect. So I'm saying that the environments that's created, rather than the look of the building on the outside in particular, the environment you experience when you walk through those front doors is not at all like you would expect in a normal medical office building clinic.
Great. Well, I think that's a great place to end. Thank you very much for your time here today.
Okay, I appreciate your time. Thank you.